The recording, the
It is.
webinar is now live and the recording has started.
Yes, look at
Fabulous.
that. Woo!
We have one person attending.
Seen the participants jumping up.
Yep, they're all joining us now.
Ooh, look at that.
Welcome, everybody. I can see that people are joining us at this point, and we will get started in a couple of minutes. So you can just, enjoy watching us sit here awkwardly for a couple of minutes while the attendees join. But welcome, and I'll do a more formal welcome in a few minutes. Okay, well, it's 1 o'clock and it looks like we've had a pause at the moment on people coming in, and I expect that people will continue to come in. Hello, everyone. I'm Beth Whiteman. I'm the chair of the English department at CSUN, and I'd like to welcome you all the attendees here today. Students, I know we have some of our faculty who are attending as well, and thank you for being here. I would also like to thank the panelists who you will meet in a few minutes, but they have very generously agreed to give up time on their weekends and sit through yet another Zoom session. So thank you again to everyone who is on the panel. This is the first panel in our series, our career panels for English majors. There will be another panel in March and another in April, and those panels are described on the landing page where you RSVP'd for this first one. So I hope you will have a look at what's to come, and we hope to see you back here in a month and 2 months. I would like to thank first our very generous supporter, without whom this panel wouldn't have happened. She is the person behind the concept, as well as supporting us in all kinds of other ways. And that is Kathy Leslie, who you can see up here. Kathy is an alum from CSUN, and she found her CSUN studies to be invaluable in a range of career paths. Kathy has had a varied life. She worked in secondary ed, in higher education, in retail, in legal departments. As a lecturer at CSUN, she was the person who coordinated the report writing class, that's English 306, which some of our students may have taken. And she also taught the intern experience class. And it is all of these experiences working with CSUN students in particular that led her to propose this panel series. She really is the driving force behind it. She is she has been very good to CSUN, and she retired a few years ago, and we really miss her. So it's good to have her back. So thank you, Kathy, for being with us today and for doing all this.
My pleasure.
Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
My pleasure. That's it.
No, okay. Our moderator today is Rochelle Yusuf, who is another CSUN alum. She worked and volunteered in the literary world for the last 8 years. Her day job is working as the membership and engagement coordinator at the CSUN Alumni Office. And again, this wouldn't be happening without Rochelle. And before I hand off, I just want to thank Wendy Ventura, who is here, but you can't see her. Wendy Ventura, there she is. Wendy is one of the administrative staff in the English department, and this really wouldn't have happened at all if it hadn't been for Wendy's expertise with Web 1 and dealing with RSVPs and making sure people got notified about things. So I want to thank her as well. Everyone has put a lot of energy and time into this, so thank you all. Rochelle, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to mute myself so nobody has to look at me anymore either. But thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you, Dr. Whiteman. Just to echo all the things that have already been said, thank you to Kathy, thank you to Dr. Whiteman and Wendy for all the work that they've done on this panel so far. And we'll introduce our panelists in a minute, but thank you all for being here. As Dr. Whiteman already mentioned, I'm a CSUN alum myself. I graduated from the English department in 2015 with my master's. So I've been in the shoe, like all of your shoes, where you're trying to work and navigate this field and trying to figure out what you're doing. And I'm so grateful to Kathy and the English department for creating this space where we can really help our English students focus on professional development and to make themselves the best candidates for employment after they leave CSUN. So we're going to start with some introductions with our panelists. I want them to give you a little bit of sense of their career path and what they're doing now. So let's start with Dan Ruth.
Hi, again, my name is Dan Ruth, and I was an acquisitions editor at most recently at Sage Publications here in Thousand Oaks. I graduated from Michigan State many years ago with a degree in English, and went directly into the Peace Corps and taught English in the Peace Corps in Zaire, the Congo, for a couple of years. Came back and I had worked in hospitals for a while, and my original intention was to go into teaching. But the baby boomers had all gone through the system by the time I came back from Africa, and so the job market in education was shrinking. So I looked around for other ways to use the English degree. I'd worked in hospitals in a couple of capacities when I was in college. So I thought it might be, since I knew medical terminology from that experience, I thought I might try to segue this. I was dating a nursing student at the time, so I just pulled her nursing books off the shelf and started writing to all the nursing publishers. And lo and behold, W.B. Saunders in Philadelphia, I was living in Nashville at the time, invited me to come in and take the copy editing test and do some interviews. And that's where my career started. At W.B. Saunders, which was right at the time, right down by Independence Hall in the middle of the city. So Philadelphia was known for medical publishing back up through about the 1990s, because several of the major publishers, Saunders had been around for over 100 years. J.B. Lippincott had been around for over 100 years. That was right across the square. And there was, I don't know, I think there was F.A. Davis, which was a nursing publisher, was there. So it was a good publishing community, and they had a very strong cooperative. So for training people in publishing, that took you on a tour of printing facilities and the different departments in the publishing house. So I consider myself lucky with that. And I was with Saunders for about 15, 17 years. I knew I've got a job as a proofreader and copy editor in the beginning, and worked at that for about 3.5, 4 years. But I knew within the first month that if I was going to stay in publishing, the job I wanted was acquisitions, because we'd get, this is back before computers, we'd get trip reports from the different acquisitions editors who were going out and working, talking to book authors and book editors. And you could see through the trip reports that these people were staying in really nice hotels and eating really nice meals and talking to some really interesting people, everything on the company dime. And I thought, I'd like this job. So the rest of my time at Saunders, basically working my way through the system to try and to get into acquisitions. Now, acquisitions editors in books go out and try to find authors to publish. In journals, you try to find new journals to publish, or you go to societies and try to publish their journals. So after I had met the head of international marketing, during a transit strike. I got a ride with him, and what happened was I had gone back to school to get my MBA at Temple, and when he found out about that, he offered me a job in international marketing. So I did that for a while. At the same time, computers were still coming in. This is in the mid 80s. And I was one of the first people, because I was doing a lot of reports for the international department, one of the first people in the company to get my hands on a desktop with a pretty rudimentary programs for spreadsheets and word processing. And I built up my expertise with that, and eventually got asked by the vice president of marketing to become their marketing analyst. Meanwhile, I still want to be an acquisitions editor. And so a couple of people advised me, if you want to be an acquisitions editor, the best route is to go through the field. So I took a sales job in the Midwest and did that for about 5 years. And finally, the telephone rang and I got offered a job. I'd been sending in a lot of editorial leads. I got a job as an acquisitions editor back in Philadelphia. And then in 1996, Sage called and offered me a job. They were looking for a medical editor here in Thousand Oaks. And I came out and interviewed, and it seemed like a great setup. And I had no regrets. I moved the family out to Thousand Oaks and finished up my career in acquisitions, first doing both books and journals, and then doing exclusively journals, which is publishing research. These are like the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, that kind of journal, except they get a lot more specialized. Those are general medical journals. And I retired about 5 years ago, but it was a great career.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to turn it over to Ron Epstein.
Thanks, Rochelle. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Rochelle said, my name is Ron Epstein, and my career path really started where most of you are now, which is at CSUN. I got my degree in journalism. I served as editor of the Daily Sundial my senior year, and I also spent a semester at KCSN to kind of put my toe in the broadcasting water. I worked at the LA Daily News for 4 years covering sports. I jumped over to the city of Pasadena and worked in kind of the public sector for a year in the public affairs office. And then I kind of landed at this company in Agoura, and I wound up spending 14 years there and grew with them as they ultimately settled in Ventura County. And I really began to learn about the business of publishing. I was a writer, always on the creative side, but in there I got that company as they launched into books and annual directories and a TV show. And of course, social media came along with that, and trade shows. I got to be part of all that, and I learned the business of publishing. I was kind of fortunate to be in the right place at the right time as they grew, and I never said no to any opportunity. And so I jumped into a little bit of everything and loved it all. In 2006, I jumped into academic publishing, which is where I worked alongside with Dan Ruth, which is an academic publishing, I'm sure, as you'll learn today, if you haven't learned already, all the publishing models are very different from one another. Even though they're all publishing, they all have different business models and financial models. And that's what I enjoyed most about them, was learning different ways to kind of reach people, different ways to spread content, and different ways to really disseminate the information. And it showed me how much more I had to learn in this industry. In late 2012, I left corporate America and went out on my own, and I purchased my own publishing company that is anchored by a print magazine called LA Parent Magazine. Today, we are a digitally focused business that spends as much time engaging our audience through our social channels as we do print, our website, our newsletters, and our virtual programming. So I love what I do. Every day is different. And that's been the challenge and the fun of publishing to me.
Thank you, Ron. Let's go Dan López.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me. I also took a kind of circuitous route. At the moment, I am at Counterpoint Press, which is headquartered in Berkeley, though there is an LA office. It's me and my boss, also named Dan. So there's a lot of Dans in publishing. That's rule number one. And I've been located here for that. But before that, I went to the University of Central Florida in Orlando. I grew up in Florida. I knew I always wanted to be in writing. I want to be an author, but I also want to be in the publishing world. At the time, we talked a little bit at the beginning before you all joined about first generation college students, that kind of stuff. That wasn't my case. Like my parents had gone to college, but they were immigrants. And so it was like kind of a different mindset. I talked to my husband about this stuff, and there's very much like from day one, this is the college you want to go to, these are the type of internships. I didn't have any of that. I just knew that I had to go to college and I had to be a state school, which is what I did. And I graduated from college. At the time, I knew I wanted to be in publishing. There was a little bit of publishing in Orlando. I think at the time, maybe Hachette or Houghton Mifflin maybe had something there, but mostly it was New York. That's at least as far as I knew. So after college, I went to New York, and I got very lucky, and I got a job working the front desk at Time Out New York, a magazine. This was 2006. And I did that for a few years, working my way up through different departments. I eventually kind of settled in the production department. But I'd had experience in writing book reviews. I had experience doing sales, like all the kind of different things. I was basically, anytime there was an opportunity to be in that universe of publishing, I would take it. And I went on to New York, went to a lot of readings and all that kind of stuff. I've been working on books that whole time, like stories, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, in 2008, the economy collapsed. And that put a lot of pressure on the magazine job. I knew I had to get out of that. And shortly thereafter, I ended up coming out to LA because my husband got into a graduate program out here at UCLA. And instead of doing long distance for 7 years, we decided to move out to LA. I came out here and I needed a job. Again, I was taking anything out there. My experience with online sales matched up with an opening at Goodreads, which at the time was a very small company. I think we had less than 5 million users. I joined as a user early on, but I didn't really know much about it. So when they were looking for an ad operations manager, someone to traffic all the ads. So somebody buys an ad online, they send it to you, you're like, okay, here's where we're going to put it, like all the technical side of that. I had a background from Time Out with that. So I ended up getting that job. And then the company quickly grew. At one point, it took me to San Francisco. And then we got acquired by Amazon. And so then I kind of fell into the Amazon thing. And the whole time I was like working my way up through the sales organization in Goodreads. But I always knew I wanted to get back to the editorial side. And of course, I've been writing myself all that time as well. So eventually I made a very difficult decision to leave Goodreads, come back to LA and try to figure out a way to get into the editorial side. And when I came back to LA, I focused on just being involved as much as I could. I started working at Lambda Literary. At the time, we were putting together the Lambda Lit Fest. I worked at a bookstore, Book Soup, on the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. I got involved in a lot of different organizations. And eventually there was an opening at Counterpoint for an editorial assistant. I was already, I think, maybe a little long in the tooth to be applying for a editorial assistant position, but I knew that that's the place I wanted to be in. And I've been doing all this other kind of stuff that gave me a really unique mix of skills, which I think worked to my benefit. So I applied for the job and luckily I got it. And that was about 2 years ago. And at the job, I do everything. I'm like learning publishing from the ground up because I knew a lot of different types of publishing, but I didn't know the day-to-day of book publishing. So it's everything, from acquisitions to the paperback release of a big successful book. One of the things I also do is I work on the audio rights, which was very interesting to learn. And we can get more into that later, but I bring it up because it's one of those things where I would have never even thought that was a possibility of a job. Like that wasn't even on my radar of things that one does in publishing, but it's actually really cool. And it's taken a lot of the skills I've developed through other jobs and really helped me grow them. So I think one thing I always say to people when I do these kind of things, when I talk to people informally, is just, you don't know the world that's out there. So anything you can do to learn about the world's out there is great, because there might be a career path that you hadn't even thought about that turns out to be something you really, really love. And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Dan. All right, Kate.
Hi, my name is Kate Marshall, and I'm an acquisitions editor at the University of California Press, which is based in Oakland. I'm originally from the East Coast. I went to a small liberal arts college and majored in history. My experience as a college student is I wasn't getting a ton of feedback or advice from my community about possible career trajectories. My professors were like, just apply to grad school. I had interned a little bit I'm from Washington, D.C. area, and I had interned at the Smithsonian Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage, but only because it was the only internship that I could find that was only a couple of days a week. It was unpaid, and it was just kind of a little bit of an entry point into understanding what cultural organizations do. And I would waitress the other days per week, and just did research to support some of the permanent staff there who put on an annual festival that happens at the National Mall each year. So that was something I did directly after college. I then started graduate school, which brought me to California. I went to Berkeley. That was in and around 2005, 2006. As some of your professors have, I'm sure, shared with you, the job market for people with PhDs in humanities degree, areas is not great. And I was starting to get super anxious about that and question what I was doing. I loved the sort of being in an intellectual environment, but I wasn't necessarily sure that this was the right career path for me. So I ended up taking a break from school after I finished my master's. And I did all sorts of things. I worked for Blue Bottle Coffee when it was a new company. I took all sorts of little temp odd jobs, and then started making a concerted effort to meet people who worked either in administration or had university aligned jobs that I thought would be sort of appropriate given my experience as a graduate student. And I ended up meeting the editorial director of University of California Press. And about 6 months later, she hired me for a position to basically be an executive assistant and editorial assistant working on her small collection of books. And so I have spent my entire adult career basically working at UC Press. Started as an assistant, was an assistant for a couple of years. It's a very mentory relationship, which is problematic in a lot of ways. Often it can be very hard to get promoted to become an acquisitions editor, particularly when you live in the Bay Area and there aren't a ton of publishers. There are options, but in New York, people get EA positions and then they move around in order to sort of move up. And so it's been, it wasn't a slow process for me, but I didn't necessarily think I was going to get promoted and become an editor at UC Press. But after the recession in 2008, there were all of these people who retired, and suddenly there was an opportunity for kind of a young and hungry and inexpensive editor to take on a couple of lists. And so, I think I should just mention that UC Press, university presses, publish many of the kinds of books that you read in the classroom, like the kinds of things that are assigned by faculty. And we also publish some crossover books for general readers and occasionally a textbook. But what distinguishes a university press from a conventional press is our peer review process. So that's that scholarly vetting of everything that we put out into the world. I'll stop so that we have more time to have a discussion, but we'll talk more about what I do.
Yes, thank you. And I think one of the things that's really great to hear from all of you is the idea that, the step that you take after college, or even, the 2, 3, 4 steps after that doesn't dictate exactly what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. So I think it's really encouraging to hear, and for our students to hear as well. So let's start it off with kind of a baseline. This conversation is really supposed to be about the publishing industry, but again, when you're especially when you're in LA and you're not maybe going to colleges that have programs for publishing specifically, it's not necessarily clear what we're talking about when we say the publishing industry. So when we say the publishing industry, what are we talking about? What are the kind of jobs? What are the kind of avenues that we're talking about when we say the publishing industry? We can go, maybe we can have Dan start. Dan López.
Oh, sure. It's a great question. It's also a very hard question to answer, especially nowadays, because there's so much in the publishing industry, and the region unfortunately does play a role. If you were in New York, you'd have a lot more options. There'd be like Kate mentioned, there'd be a ton of houses you can go to. But I think of the publishing industry when we're talking about book publishing as kind of the three big departments. You have your editorial, obviously, you have your sales, marketing, and you have publicity. I kind of group those together, and then you have all this, what I think of like all the sort of technical stuff. Like you have production, you have sales, like all that kind of back end stuff. How you get into all those jobs, as we've talked about, it's very varied. How you find a way in. But then, okay, so then the other side of it is it's the new economy, and there's an online component. You can do publishing through Amazon. All those kind of places have in-house publishing arms. So you might not think of, when you're thinking of, I want to get into publishing, you might not immediately think, let me go on Amazon.com and see what type of publishing jobs they have. But they do. They have a whole series of imprints, and they're mostly, I think, in Seattle, though there are some. I'm in Santa Monica. There's some here. There's also audio. One of the audio houses is here. And there's lots of places where you can kind of get into that. So if you want to look at the scope of publishing, look at the kind of things you're reading and then check out the other properties associated with it. So like if you really like a nonfiction book you're reading, like look at that author, look at the press, see where they're placing the book. And then that'll give you a sense of the different outlets that are promoting the book and that possibly have jobs in that world. Sorry, that's a little unclear. I'm going to let someone else jump in and make it a little clearer.
Go for it, Ron. I think you unmuted. Go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say I think it's important to remember publishing is a huge term. And in a lot of cases, and keep in mind, I'm on the consumer side of publishing now. So publishing, we see more competition of people who call themselves publishers. And whether you're publishing to me and it's kind of transforming into media is about disseminating content. So it's not unique to books. It's not unique to digital. It's a kind of a blending of all those things. In my world, it's print, digital, it's social, it's broadcast, and it's virtual events. And those all have to play together. And I mean, publishing is about disseminating information. And those are important things I think that's important to kind of keep in context on this. What kind of publishing, what kind of jobs are available? I think they're fun jobs, but I think they require you to hustle. I think the titles you'll find in our industry, whether you're in Dan's industry or Kate's industry or mine, they're all different. LA Parent, for instance, we're hiring for a digital community editor. I'm not even sure what that title means, and it's my business. But I think we want someone who's grown up in the digital media environment, someone who loves and lives social media, but someone who's a good writer. So it's blending all these skills that Dan López just touched on, and you have to know the industry, obviously. And I obviously location makes a big difference, less so these days where we're all working from home, or many of us are working from home. And the one caveat to that is that, my business is all entirely focused on Los Angeles and its suburbs. So I need someone who understands the landscape here. So if we're going to talk, write, or broadcast about, visiting this family-friendly environment like the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, and then we're going to send you to Descanso Gardens, because of traffic, you can't do that. So I can't hire someone who's in Pittsburgh and who doesn't understand the mess that the 405 is. So I need someone who's here. But there are small niche publishers, consumer, academic, and everything in between, up and down the West Coast. I know because I found a lot of them. And so it's about, and to Dan's point earlier, you may not know what doors are going to open for you. So I guess I would say, look at a little bit of everything. I never in a million years figured I would be owning and running my own publishing business. But doors open, you jump in them, you look what's in there, and it takes your career in a whole different direction. So it's a fun journey.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to chime in and just build on that to say that any sort of media content that you consume, there are people behind its production, right? So whether that's a comic book or a magazine or a conventional book or some sort of website, there are jobs that require all sorts of different skill sets that are involved with getting that content out to readers. So I had, for example, I worked with someone temporarily who was a I don't know if they were an intern or they had this little temporary position that was for college credit. And she went on to get a job at a comic book publisher that I had never even heard of in San Francisco. And now she's their director of marketing, and is in this completely different publishing world from me. But she started her career with that sort of entry-level administrative position, realized that she wasn't super interested in being an editor, but she loved promoting stuff. And so she moved into this marketing direction, and I think has a really satisfying career. She feels very passionate about the product that she is getting out in the world. So yeah, Dan, sorry, I interrupted you.
No problem. I was starting to say, most people think of publishing, they think of book publishing, but you really have to widen your horizons. I mean, publishing is communication. So we get the Acorn here, which is a community newspaper. It's controlled circulation, which means everybody gets it, and they make their money off advertising. But they produce and distribute content, and that's what it's all about. I mean, one of the great joys in publishing is meeting people. And when Ron joined Sage, he opened my eyes to trade publishing. He was the president of the Western Publishers Association. And that was completely off my radar. But once I saw what trade publishing was and niche publishing, then it was an epiphany, really. They used to have a Western Publishers Association. I don't know if they still do, had a conference down in LA where all the trade publishers would get together, and sometimes they'd have exhibits and show off their wares, and they'd always have a contest based on design, content, editorial relevance, and so forth. And you saw hundreds of different kinds of publications. They're all legitimate publishing. Sometimes the smaller the office that you get into, as somebody already has mentioned, the more you can learn, because if they're understaffed, you're doing everything. My wife worked for, we lived in Chicago for a couple of years, and she had a music degree. So she got a job with The Musician, which was a publisher right there in Chicago that published for high school music teachers. It was a very small office, but she came out of that learning as much as I had learned in 10 years at W.B. Saunders in a major publishing house. One of the really interesting anecdotes, if you don't mind, is when we went to one of the Western they give you an idea of what trade publishing is. I was talking with a woman who had an exhibit, or no, she had a little talk about how to start a new journal. And she mentioned that she had been at a trade, she'd been at a custom car convention, because her company was publishing a journal on custom cars, a trade magazine. And it wasn't getting off the ground. They were really, because of competition, they were trying to get advertising, and they had the mailing list, but they were trying to get this thing moving, and it wasn't moving. And her exhibit at the conference was next to this guy who was selling custom motorcycle parts. And he was looking at her magazine, and he said, "Wow, this is a great magazine." He said, "I wish we had something like this for custom motorcycles." And she says, "Well, you mean you don't?" And he says, "No, we don't have any vehicles servicing our industry." And she went back and on a dime told her staff, which was probably 3 or 4 people, "We're going to change. We're changing our business." And they turned everything around. She hired a guy who was really an expert in motorcycles, and started up a motorcycle trade magazine. They worked about 18 hours a day getting this thing started. But after 2 years, she was able to sell it for mega bucks. But you just have to keep an open mind and look for whatever opportunities, like they've said, what might avail themselves.
Right. And so we've talked about what the publishing industry is, but in terms of the state of the publishing industry today, are there jobs? Are there entry-level jobs? Has, the big elephant in the room, right? COVID, has it affected your jobs or the market from your perspective?
I can start. And I would say that, yes, obviously COVID has hurt a lot of people, a lot of businesses. Publishing is, at least as long as I've known it, has not exactly been, full of jobs and giving them away. But when you think of it, and I like this term, I think Ron used it earlier, disseminating information. When you think of publishing as just a vehicle for disseminating information, that opens up the world a lot. And then you can kind of start understanding all the different roles that can help meet that goal. In that case, I think there are a lot of new jobs all the time. Because of COVID, there's all sorts of new opportunities for working from home. I know that at my company, we've hired several people, interns and otherwise, throughout the course of the pandemic for remote jobs. Now, those are jobs that may remain remote, or they may become like, at some point you have to move to, we're owned by Catapult, which is in New York. So you might have to end up moving to New York or whatever, but it gives people an opportunity at least to get the foot in the door. Like we've had people in places I wouldn't even think of, like Louisiana, like all these kind of places where you don't normally think, oh, that's where you go for publishing. So I think in some ways the pandemic has given more flexibility to people from markets that aren't like New York, which has been great. And then, like I said, also, and like everyone here has been saying, there's a lot of ways to get into that business of disseminating information. And those things, the more digitally savvy you are, the more connections you have, the more ways you like find your niche. Like, oh, I really love, whatever, comic books or housewares or whatever. There's going to be a blog, there's going to be an influencer, there's going to be someone who's building a business around that. And the skills you learn at a place like CSUN or on variety of jobs or anything like that will help you position yourself and be like, oh, I'm going to be really good at writing copy, or I'm going to be really good at telling the narrative, or I'm going to be really good at knowing the people that we have to contact to sell the product, like the influencers, or how to get distribution, all that kind of stuff. Like you can kind of start understanding where those pieces fit. So in that sense, like the pandemic has made it, I don't want to say better, but it's made it like more accessible from different places. Like you're not automatically cut out because you're not in like one of 3 places in the country.
Rochelle, if I can jump in, Dan made some good points. He also raised influencers. Well, let me back up for a second. You asked about kind of the state of publishing. In one word, I would call it fluid. I think it's different today than what it was last year at this time. Certainly it's different today than what it was 5 years. And I think if you look at any growing industry, and hopefully most are growing, that's how you describe every industry. Whether you work for Nordstrom, whether you work for Ford, whether you work for the Lakers, they're all different. In our industry, and this is where I go back to Dan's reference to influencers on the consumer side have made our world, our sandbox, much more crowded. Whether you consider them publishers or not, that's a different conversation. But you have to recognize their role in our industry and what they bring to the table, and how, me as a slightly more conventional publisher, how I'm either going to accommodate or how I'm going to combat them. So it's, there are jobs yes, there are jobs. That's a short answer. We run an intern program out of LA Parent, and we funnel it through CSUN and through Pepperdine. But I've never had a shortage of people applying for our intern jobs. We've never had, anytime we post a job, I've never seen a shortage of people looking for jobs. So, and all my friends in publishing say something similar. So I think there are jobs. I think location is becoming less of an issue. But I think the multi-platform side of things is becoming more relevant. So you need to be part of the social media discussion. You need to be part of the broadcast. You need to be part of virtual events. Those all weave their ways into publishing.
Okay, so, and you can be as specific or as vague as you want to be in this question, but if we talk logistics here and very concrete details for an entry-level position, what can someone expect in terms of salary or benefits, workload? I think Kate mentioned too a little bit about the career ladder and how it's sometimes hard to get promoted. Can you talk a little bit about those sort of actual logistics details of having an entry-level position in publishing?
Most entry-level positions are starting out in the 20s somewhere. And when you're just starting out, I think the key question once you've found a reasonable salary, you know, minimal salary that you can exist on, is when you're choosing, when you're looking around, am I going to learn something? Is this job going to force me to learn something? Because when you're starting out, you want to learn as much as you can and as quickly as you can. And part of that is to determine what your next step is going to be, because you should always be thinking of, okay, what job do I really want? Where do I, you know, the old just on 5 years, where do I see myself? And then try to position yourself in selecting jobs to get to that point.
I think the starting salary for an editorial assistant is a little higher than that now. I mean, I've heard it's still a very low paying job. I've heard that in New York, editorial assistants make between $30,000 and $35,000. Dan, you might know more. At UC Press, the position is a union position. So I think the starting salary is like $40,000 or $45,000 a year, and editorial assistants are not expected to work more than the 9-to-5 job, but I'm under the impression that isn't the case, or the culture of being an editorial assistant in New York. Now, marketing assistant positions tend to garner like a higher wages. Marketing positions in general often start, the entry-level position is a higher salary than acquisitions.
Yeah, I would.
The risk of stating the
go
obvious,
ahead.
I'm going to
Go ahead,
say,
Ron.
the smaller the company, the more conservative the compensation. The bigger the company, the more room for growth, the probably the higher you're going to start. That said, entry level jobs in our companies start in the 30s. We ask people to do a diversity of skills and diversity of jobs, but if someone's going to live in Southern California, you can't hire someone at less than about 35.
Yeah, I would jump in to Kate's point that I think the big five, so I mean those are the major publishers you've heard of if you're unfamiliar with the term, and they're all in New York. I think their starting salaries are more or less around 40, 42 now, and that was a recent change. That was in the last couple of years that they kind of did a PR rollout. What has gone unsaid so far is that the problem with the low paying jobs, and they are low paying jobs, is that it tends to attract people from more financially stable backgrounds, and that leaves a lot of people out. And that's one of the reasons why I think raises have been happening in the industry, because there's this push in the industry the book publishing industry is what I'm talking about. I should be clear very specifically, to be less than like 95% white, which is what it is now. And so there's been a big push to like, let's raise salaries so that we can attract people that can't afford to have another job or can't afford to take a very low paying job. And honestly, that was one of the reasons why I stayed. Well, I didn't actively stay out of publishing, but it was not a possibility for me to take an editorial job when I lived in New York in my 20s. I could not afford, and I shared rent, and I was always hustling, doing something, but I couldn't afford to like make nothing to hope to rise up the ranks. And on top of that, you're competing with people that went to all these great schools or have MFAs or all this other kind of stuff, which I didn't. So my path was find a job that pays, because I have to pay, and hopefully it's in the right space, and develop those skills so that down the line, when you're more secure, you can then take a step back. And like, that's super disheartening. And I don't necessarily advocate that is like a great way to run an industry. But I say, because I think you need to, as someone looking to get into this industry, especially if you want to get into like traditional publishing, you have to be flexible. You have to find ways to like pay your way and develop a bunch of skills so that when you go up for those jobs, like Ron brought up a great point, there's never a shortage of people applying for these jobs. So when you're going up against those, you have to have something in your background that's an X factor that differentiates you from everybody else that's applying for that job. And sometimes those are also routes you took so you can make a little money, so you have some in the bank, so you can afford to take a temporary step back.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. It's trying to find that balance of like, what do I need to do to live and have a decent minimum quality of life, versus maybe making the choice to kind of stick it out for a little bit with the hope that it kind of pays off in the long run. Ron, you unmuted. Do you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, Dan's points were spot on.
Yeah. One question that I thought of too, because we're from LA and we're looking at this from the LA point of view, we're not talking about students that are coming to these jobs with publishing degrees, like maybe some people do it in New York. Do you think it's necessary to have or pursue a degree and or certificate in publishing?
No, I just want to immediately jump in and
Yeah,
say,
I know. I saw you shaking your head.
yeah, I mean, there are these publishing programs. I think Columbia has one, and there's another. There are a few, and there are some of the big publishers have these prestigious, hard to get, entry-level, year-long publishing internships where you rotate through different departments. I really don't think these are essential. You know, maybe it helps people get foot in the door. I think if you're interested in the technical side of like copy editing, yeah, it's a good idea to take a copy editing suite, which you can usually do at your local community college. I took one at the Berkeley Extension School after grad school, and it was not expensive. It was something I did over the course of 6 months. I don't copy edit at all in my position, but I just wanted to pick up the skill set, and because I was working at the press, they paid for it. So there are little things you can do to develop publishing or content editorial skills that, but you do not need to have a specialized degree or certification.
Does everyone agree with that?
Yeah.
I would just condition it on, take a look, if you really know what kind of publishing you want to be in, it might require you to go certain routes. I had an assistant who attended a publishing school program up in New England, up in Boston, I believe. And they had one track of their program was geared toward fashion publishing, where they actually went down to Condé Nast and were able to meet people down there. In other words, the program gave her an entree that would have been difficult for anybody without that kind of connection to get in there. But that's pretty rare. I agree pretty much with what what Kate just mentioned. You shouldn't cut yourself off, you know, if you don't have that, unless
Right.
the circumstances require it.
Right. And so then what skills and expertise would you recommend that our students sort of work on or emphasize in order to be competitive in this job market?
Be able to write a good letter.
Oh, write a good letter. I was going to say, you know, we hire editorial assistants all the time. And also I've been on hiring panels for marketing assistants, and like we look for people with customer service skills. Like that is clear communication, having a nice introductory letter, writing skills is valued, but I really look for when hiring for those entry-level positions, someone who I know is going to be poised when communicating with external stakeholders, which are my authors usually. I look for people who are organized, and I look for people who feel passionate about the content. They don't need to be experts. Like I'm not looking for people with graduate degrees to be my assistant to work on University Press books, but you know, I want there to be some intellectual engagement or excitement about what we're doing. But yeah, I think people undersell their customer service experience all the time, and it's really valued.
Yeah, I would 1% jump on that, because like no matter what role you're in, you're a representative for the publisher, the company, the blog, whoever it is, when you're speaking to vendors, authors, whoever, and they want to know, like your boss wants to know that you're not going to embarrass the company, and it's super important. I agree.
I'm going to add on that, and I think you're both 100% right. I think show your personality when you're talking to these companies. You know, tell them what you're about, show them what you're passionate about, and don't be afraid when they say, "Do you know how to do this?" or "If you have experience doing that." You know, we're not looking to hire people who are experts in every field. We want people who are passionate or who are intelligent, and we can teach them, you know, the nuances of the job.
Right. I had a question, I got distracted. Okay, let's go to what would be your advice for someone looking for a job? So tips, things to avoid, where to go to look for jobs. And I'm specifically curious in the LA context, because you know, again, not unlike the big five in New York, we don't necessarily, not all of these companies, some of the smaller ones have a job listing site on their website or, things like that. So where do you go to find those kinds of jobs?
I used to say you go to a lot of events. I guess you still can virtually, as we're doing now, but it was great that you can go to physical places and there's all like an author reading. There's always going to be their editor, the publicist, or someone connected to that press there that you can usually chat with and start making introductions. It's all about meeting people. I mean, all industries, but I think maybe especially publishing, it's about the relationships. Also subscribe to as many different industry newsletters as you can. Oftentimes they list jobs at the bottom. I don't quote me on this, but I believe I found my current job through a local thing called Dan's List. Again, another Dan. And it's like a list of nonprofit jobs in the LA area. My job is not a nonprofit job, but there's overlap with other industries. So you can kind of see a bunch of stuff. So like, if you want to be in the event world, if you want to be in the like nonprofit world, if you want to be in all those kind of places, there's going to be a news list for it somewhere. And this one in particular, Dan's List, was very good for the LA area.
And very likely there'll be some kind of an association in that particular industry. For example, university presses, there's an American Association of University Presses, and they actually have a job board there.
Any advice on how to get that job?
If you
Things they
can
should
get,
do, things they should avoid?
if you can get an interview, I think the most critical thing, at least when I was interviewing people for editorial assistant jobs and so forth, is find out something about the company before you go there. I mean, don't walk into the company cold and expect whoever you're interviewing with to tell you about their company. You should, especially nowadays when the information is so readily available online. Everybody has a website, and that should be your starting point. But then learn as much as you can about the company. Not only you may want to cross it off your list if you in that investigation decide that this really isn't the kind of culture or type of information I want to get into. But it's really an insult to whoever you're interviewing if you come in and don't know anything about the company. And I've had a couple interviews like that, and I'm thinking, what did I miss with the application?
Dan's points are great. I would also add into that, do your research on LinkedIn. Look at all the people who are in this industry, see where they came from. Dan López mentioned it's who you know. LinkedIn is great for that. I found some great connections of mine, and maybe through a second or third connection through LinkedIn, but eventually I get to where I want to go and learn about that company. So reading about the company on their website, going through LinkedIn, talking to more people. It's what it's all about. It's hustling.
And I would just add that, building off of what Dan was saying earlier, is that all media worlds are undergoing a little bit of a reckoning right now, or a big reckoning right now. And I do think there's an effort to recruit sort of candidates that are outside the conventional pool. Like I just remember the kinds of people who became editorial assistants when I lived back east were like Yale graduates who, were off to law school, but were going to hustle in publishing for a couple of years or something. And just how intimidating that world was. It certainly was to me. I think, I think there's at UC Press, but at many publishing houses, there's a real concerted effort to bring in a wider pool of candidates. And so I would just say, don't be intimidated to put your candidacy forward.
Yeah, and I saw that you shared a few resources in the chat, so make sure you guys check that out. I forgot to mention too, if anyone listening in has some questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. I think we'll do a couple more questions here, and then we'll go look at the Q&A. My list. So we've talked a little bit about, I think Dan mentioned networking. Do you feel like the publishing industry is a world in which it really does matter who you know. And again, I'm sort of speaking to the LA side because I do think we are a little bit smaller and a little bit more of that kind of community feel versus maybe something like New York, where I'm sure it still matters who you know, but maybe you can just hop on a publisher's website and apply versus, you know, here maybe it depends a little bit on, are you in the room when someone says we're looking for, you know, X, Y, and Z?
I think so. And I think, I mean, not that people don't get jobs without being super well connected. I don't want to discourage anyone. But I think like, because the LA publishing literary world is so connected that if there's an opening, you know, 12 people are going to know someone who knows someone there, has some connection. And they ask their buddy, and their buddy's like, oh yeah, I know the editor over there. They're great. Say this, that, and the other thing. So it behooves you, again, to the networking part, to like, and don't kill yourself. Don't be like creepy about it, but like, you know, go to things you're legitimately interested in, read up in things you're legitimately interested in, like follow the, you know, gossip for areas that you're interested in, just so you have talking points, just so you have something, and you're going to meet people that way. And then those people are going to think about you. You know, get involved at the library, get involved with like, there's a journal, for instance, I'm just thinking of, called Dryland. That's like a literary journal that's here in LA. And the woman who runs it is amazing. And she built it up from the ground floor, you know, and she hustles for it. And she's also super nice. Like, look people like that up and like be friends with them on social media and go to their events and just chat with people, so that when there's an opening somewhere and you guys might know the same people, and then that's like a talking point for the person you're interviewing with. And it makes you feel more comfortable too. You don't feel like an imposter. Like, that was always an issue for me. Like, I never wanted to apply for these types of jobs because I'm like, again, I don't have an MFA, I didn't go to these great programs or anything like that. Like, there's going to be 1,000 people that are like ahead of me in line. Even when I applied for this job, I'm like, there's no way I'm getting it. And when I looked at, you know, talking to people, and I found out some of the other people I knew in my world that applied for it, I was like, I would have hired that person over me. But for whatever reason, you know, like, I got the job because of my mix of skills. But that's the kind of thing that you want. You want to be like talking to people, you want to be meeting people, you want to be finding those points of interest that you can kind of use while interviewing.
Dan,
And it
Ruth
helps to
mentioned-
let people know that you're looking.
And in the universe of traditional, well, I wouldn't even say traditional book publishing, but there are a lot of connections to be made at cultural events, literary events, you know, book fairs, even simply working in a bookstore that has a speaker program. You know, these become really, you know, when I got into publishing, I wasn't even aware that there are a lot of publishers. It's not a huge universe, but you know, Lonely Planet is in the Bay Area. We talked about earlier, the Public Library of Science is in the Bay Area. There were, and these were spaces that weren't on my radar until I started volunteering at the Oakland Book Fair, just out of interest and making connections with people in the region. And I think, you know, these are, if you have time or things that you want to attend, these are things that are rich and happening in LA and any major city.
Dan had mentioned the value of associations. When I was at CSUN, I joined an association called the Society of Professional Journalists. And I know it's hard to make this happen when you're in college and, you know, you're counting every dollar, but I think the $25 a year I pay to join that got me introduced to a lot of professionals who are in this field already. And as I kind of moved along, lo and behold, I ran into people I knew. So those associations are good. And if they've got a college arm that has lower rates, they're great.
Yeah, and Dan López and I have known each other from like, I think there's like so many different ways that finally led to us sort of meeting, and it's interesting that how important it is to really just show up. I mean, it is a little bit maybe harder in a virtual world where, you know, it's just a screen, but it's important that people see you and get to know you. Okay, so we have time for one more question. I'm going to ask about we already talked a little bit about this, but overlooked avenues in the publishing industry. And I also kind of want to throw in the question about, because someone brought it up, about bookstores and book selling, a sort of adjacent field. Maybe Dan, you can start, because I know you worked at a bookstore. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what that's like.
Yeah, I mean, I love my current job, but before I took this job, my favorite job of all the jobs I ever had was working at Book Soup. Like, it was, I'd worked retail all through college, and I didn't realize how much I missed that like interaction, especially a place like a bookstore. Like bookstore jobs are not easy to get. That's like another, like everything is like a hurdle in this industry. That's something that's probably true of all industries, but that's something you should be aware of. And you need a lot of the same sort of skills like knowledge and, you know, personality and customer service, all that kind of stuff we talked about applies to bookstores too. But if you can get into a bookstore, it's really cool because you get to meet, like Kate mentioned, a lot of authors, you get to meet a lot of tastemakers in the area. And I can tell you now from working in a publisher and seeing how like publicity and marketing work as well, those relationships are super important. Like when you're trying to break a book, you are hoping that booksellers on the like indie level are out there promoting and hand selling that. So like knowing how that world works helps you if eventually you end up in a publisher, but also being in that role is super rewarding because you get to put books you're really excited about in people's hands, books that change your lives, books that like are going to change someone else's lives. And you build that rapport with customers. And it's just like, it's a great feeling. And you learn a lot of how the industry works. You learn how returns work. You learn how events work. You just kind of learn customer service skills and retail skills, and you learn how to deal with problems. There's always going to be some creepy person that's coming in the store and you're like, oh yeah, that's Joe. He's always in here on Wednesdays. This is how we handle it, you know, or this is like a really famous customer that is always very particular about their online orders. So we have to make sure to do that. So you kind of learn all those skills that are applicable across any sort of industry. And again, you meet a lot of people. You meet you know, it's funny, like one of the authors we publish now, years ago when I worked at the bookstore, she did an event there. And I remember that event and I didn't know anything about the publisher at the time. And now I'm working on her new book. And it's just like one of those things that like, I probably met my now boss at that time and neither one of us remembers it, but we were both at that event. I was working it, he was there representing the publisher. So it's just like those kind of funny things that happen and you get to like remember it later and be like, oh yeah, I remember this author, and you have that relationship. So those kind of things are really fun and they're rewarding in their own right.
We haven't.
And I would just say, like, the internet is all, the publishers, media people are super online on Twitter and stuff. Like my assistant found his job on Twitter. Like one of my authors retweeted that I was hiring an editorial assistant. He didn't tell me that till later, but I'm saying that you can use, you know, particularly in this pandemic context where we're not out socializing people, but there's an opportunity to sort of follow industry news easily online.
We haven't talked at all about textbooks, but that's a huge industry, and that's certainly thriving. And I think it's one of the most exciting industries because the more it's grown with the increase of technology, and the more we learn about learning styles, the more that's going to accelerate and develop. But textbooks have their own sales forces, just as professional books usually have a sales force. I mentioned that when I was trying to get into acquisitions, I was advised to go into sales. And there were three reasons for that. One was to just get out of the office and meet people. Another was to build up expertise in the product, because you can't sell something without knowing something about the product, whatever book you're selling. And the other is to increase your salary base, because usually sales have a commission or some kind of a sales bonus, and that can push you up pretty quickly if you're successful. But the main thing in textbooks require a lot of development, and it requires a lot of product knowledge. And one of the easiest ways, meaning quickest, to develop that is having to go out day after day and sell specific books to people who are looking at maybe 3 or 4 other books that you're competing with. And so you really have to know the product well. And once you know the product well, then you know what the next step is into developing your own product. And that's what acquisitions is all about. There are a lot of jobs in textbooks that aren't in say other kinds of academic books, like developmental editors, project editors, where you have a concept and you have an author, but you want to make sure that the book that you're selling to the textbooks is going to meet the needs of the teachers you're selling to and the students. So you go out and you review specific chapters or sections of the books. You have asked professors to read those over and give you feedback on how to improve it. And that's a whole subculture of developmental editing that you really don't learn about until you get into the field. But it's if somebody's interested in that, it can be fascinating.
All right, thank you, thank you. So let's turn it over to some questions from panel participants, excuse me. I did see one that was in the Q&A about Boston related, Boston area publishing opportunities, and Kate, I see that you responded. The other thing I was going to mention Boston related is it's not, I don't think it's exactly publishing, but book club, I believe is out of Boston. I have a friend who lives in Boston and works for them. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add to share with Emma about Boston related opportunities. All right. So some of the questions in the chat, we have one from Gwen who asks, how might you approach a publishing internship while still in school?
Some schools have them. Like when I mentioned earlier, I went to the University of Central Florida in Orlando. The Florida Review it's a small academic journal, but it was published out of UCF. And my very first only internship in publishing was with them. I was like a poetry reader and I read submissions. So look in your school, there might be a publishing literary journal. If not that, sometimes the universities have relationships with local publishers, and they might be able to point you towards internship type jobs as well.
Failing that, you can call if you have a publisher in the area, you can just call their office and ask for an information interview. And usually there'll be somebody that they'll direct you to within the company that will either in human resources or in editorial or marketing, whatever field you're interested in, that you can talk with and get a sense. I mean, it does two things. You get a sense of a deeper understanding of what's involved, but it also puts you on their radar for when you want to get an internship or maybe apply for a job. I mentioned when I was in Philadelphia, I was in copy editorial, and through a Philadelphia transit strike, I happened to get a ride with the director of international marketing, just pure serendipity. And in the course of our riding together for 2 or 3 weeks during the course of the strike, I mentioned that I was in the MBA program in international business. And so I asked him if I could come up and talk with him. And I went in there one day and called him up and we set up an appointment. And we talked for about an hour and he told me what the department did. And I thanked him very much and I got up to leave and he said, "Aren't you going to ask me?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, I thought you came up to ask for a job." I said, "Well, you don't, I didn't see any postings for your department." He said, "No, but we can always bring somebody in." And that's the following week, I was working in international marketing. That's how things happen.
Yeah, definitely. Like we said, you just never know who you're going to meet when you show up places, right? I'm actually was going to talk about my experience getting an internship through CSUN, but I think our panelist, Kathy, might also speak about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy.
Oh, well, thank you. I had a question for the panel. I would actually defer to Beth as to where the intern program is right now. I know that, things have changed in the 5 years since I taught the class, but I do know that a number of, in fact, I hope everybody here will attend our second session because we have 2 of the 4 panelists who are English alum came through the intern program and can speak very specifically about how those internships led to jobs with, at a living wage using their skills that they're really enjoying, and 2 of them are marketing. So I hope that, I think the internship, if you can get it any way that you can, with or without course credit, is absolutely worth the time that you spend. I don't know if Beth wants to respond to that before I ask my question.
Sure. We actually, because of the pandemic, had suspended the internship program for a few semesters, and it will still be suspended in the fall. However, we are gathering information about other kinds of internship programs and internship courses. There's currently a course, I put something about it in the chat, but there's an internship course that operates through the Seng College. And it's a sort of CSU-wide internship course. We also have, and I've been trying to find it, but I can't. We also have the Northridge Review. So that is the undergraduate student-produced literary magazine, which I misspelled in the chat, you know, typo queen right here. But the Northridge Review is a course that English majors can take, and you work on all aspects of deciding on what goes into the magazine. They also produce the magazine. So, and we've developed a digital platform for that as well as a physical platform. So there are a lot of different opportunities to develop skills if you take the Northridge Review course. That's offered every semester.
Yeah, and I was also going to add the internship. I took Kathy's internship class and an internship at a small press here in LA, Rare Bird. You know, with or without the internship course at CSUN, you can also pretty easily find a list of small presses in LA who are, I'm sure, more than happy to have some additional help. It is likely going to be unpaid. I know that there are rules about internships and, you know, what you should be getting in exchange for an internship. So, you know, be mindful of that. But, you know, there are opportunities in LA specifically to get some of that experience. And then, yeah, I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things I did notice, if students, I think a lot of students are like my experience. I worked at Ralph's Grocery Company while I was paying for my education. So not an office job. And I think one of the greatest, so I'm really grateful to Kate for pointing out the customer service skills are something you should talk up in your interview, no matter where you got them, because they come in handy. They're tremendously transferable. But for students who, like myself, didn't have the opportunity to work in offices and haven't had a chance to have acquired maybe the Microsoft Suite set of skills, PowerPoint, Photoshop, are there a number of basic skill levels you would encourage students to seek out so that, per Dan López's point, they're competitive within that pool of resumes? They're still hoping for that thing that will lift them out, but we don't want them to be deficient either. Is there something that you would recommend that all students have, are conversant with, in order to be as competitive as the next job seeker in this field?
I'm going to jump into that because I think showing your skills in social media and communication is critical here. You know, it's what keeping all of us alive. Publishing, whether you look at it from a conventional or unconventional medium, is about staying connected to people in a 360-degree circle. And whether companies admit it or not, that's whatever the touch point is between my company and the consumer, I've got to find that. So it's print, digital, social, events, whatever. It's essential that you don't have to be a master at all those domains, but you have to be efficient at them. And back to an earlier question you raised, Kathy, the more diversification you can show on your resume, whether it's bilingual, whether it's writing, editing, marketing, design, the more you can show, the more talking points you have in that interview. And you really never know where the conversation is going to go. You know, when we bring people in, we're not bringing them in because they meet the minimum criteria. We're bringing them in because they meet the minimum criteria and they show these interests or skill set that go above and beyond. And our job is never going to be here. Our job is going to be expanding as it goes. So don't be afraid to show all the arrows in your quiver.
And I also think it kind of depends on what job you're applying for. Like, so for example, if you're applying to be a production editor and to like work directly and interface with copy editors, you may be asked to take a basic copy editing test. That's pretty common. But an acquisitions or marketing colleague is not going to be asked to take a copy editing test for an entry-level position. And I don't think I think people kind of go overboard saying like, I know how to use Excel and all these things. And, basic computer literacy is essential in any job in media right now. But, beyond that, I don't think, if you're applying for a marketing position and you're really savvy on social media, that's something you would obviously highlight. But for the entry-level editorial assistant position, I don't think there's like one particular thing that you need to check off your resume to get your position noticed. Your application notice, that's what I meant to say.
All right, well, we have another question from Gwen who asks, or who says, I'm the editor-in-chief of an undergraduate online magazine, and we begin hiring again this coming fall. What kind of traits should I look for when interviewing? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Go ahead, Ron.
I wanted to reread the question. What kind of trait should I look for when interviewing? Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. We have a saying in our office, and that is, we don't want to see the shock value in an interview. We've had some people say some, at least confess some things in the interview that we don't want to hear. And so be mindful when you're going to interview someone that, you want to stay on topic. That's important. I would also say to anyone interviewing, and this is something that we've had firsthand experience with now, the first thing that we do after we go through, if we get 30 resumes in and we pare our list down to 5 candidates, the first thing that I have our company do is we Google each one of those candidates. If you have stuff on social media that that may not play well, if we're doing our research, hide it. We've had more people disqualify themselves because we've seen pictures or statements that just don't look that good, and they may show a radical view here. And remember, and I think Dan raised this point earlier, you're going to ultimately represent our brand, so I need you got to be mindful of that. It's not to say we don't welcome all opinions and all ideas, but if I see a picture and you're holding a beer and you're jumping off some boat, that's not the person we want to project who's going to be in our company. So back to Gwen's question, about what traits you interview. I want someone who's got their act together. I want someone who's focused. I want someone who's never going to say, that's not my job. I want someone who's going to embrace new challenges, someone who can show diversification of skill set, and ultimately can start here and grow here and grow here and take on more and more responsibility.
All right, and I think we had one other question that I know Kate started to answer here, but I'll just throw it out to the rest of you. When we talk about customer service experience and, avoiding things on your resume that don't apply to the specific field that you're applying to, how do you suggest inserting customer service experience into a job that is, not for customer service? Do you do it in the cover letter, resume, in an interview? What are your thoughts?
I can jump in here. I've had a lot of jobs and a lot of gigs, to the point where when applying for positions, I very much have to tailor what I list because I don't want to be 12 pages long. I would say, like, as a rule, I wouldn't automatically exclude like grocery stores or anything like that, especially when you're starting out, if that's like your only experience. If you do have a bunch of stuff and you're not sure, think about the position, think about what they're calling for and what of your experience you can kind of plug in there. And regardless of what you list, you want to tailor the skills and you want to tailor all like the information in your cover letter towards what they're looking for. My rule of thumb is when applying for a job, like, you're looking for the thing that's going to get you to the call, where they're going to like screen you and say, this is the person, these are the people we're thinking of bringing in. So you want to put that in your resume. Like, don't worry about being complete. Don't worry about, you don't want to lie, but don't worry about like being, this is strictly, I only did X task at this job and then I did Y task over here. Like, you want to kind of massage and you want to tell a narrative obviously without lying, but you want to like tell a narrative through your resume and through your cover letter that shows the trajectory towards why this is a job you want now. And if you have to pull on your, Ralph's background, I worked at Winn-Dixie, I've definitely put that on resumes, then do that. And if you don't have to because you have like another thing that's a better fit, use that instead. But I would say as a general rule, it's all available to you. So don't think that like they're not going to hire me because I worked at CVS. Like, that's not the case.
Totally. And I would just say that I think a common mistake that I see in cover letters and resumes, at least for the editorial assistant position, is people thinking they're going to get the job, and what they're primarily going to be doing is working with the text and providing line edits with red pencils and giving authors feedback. And that's just like not what the editorial, it's not even what my job is like. And my job is a lot like being a book producer. I do some developmental work on books I publish, but a lot of what I'm doing is just managing the process and curating the list. And my assistant is the one who is doing all of the administrative work associated with in support of building my list. So sometimes when people dwell too much on like their literary background or how much they, like their love of fiction or whatever, it makes me think that they're not being realistic about what the job is. Whereas somebody who says, yeah, no, one of the things that really appeals to me about this job is I'm really excited to work with authors and help support them. I have customer service experience. It's something I excelled at. And, that's really signals to me the person applying understands what the job is, and has truly relevant experience. So.
Yeah, and if somebody's coming in brand new to the work experience, it's sort of like job application 101. But if you can find somebody whose judgment you trust, do some role playing and have them interview you, because that'll give you a different perspective on not only the interview process and how you can sort of position yourself, but you may want to change your resume on the basis of that.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Whiteman just did a little advertisement here for student assistant jobs on campus. I highly recommend if you're a student looking into jobs on campus, because you can get that customer service experience in certain positions, but you can also get that office experience that oftentimes, that I didn't have when I was graduating as an undergrad. I only had the Starbucks experience. So definitely take a look at those if you're able to. Okay, I think that's it for our time today. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we'll stick around for a minute, but I think that's it. I'll turn it over to Dr. Whiteman.
Thanks, Rochelle. Thank you for doing such a fabulous job moderating the discussion. And thanks again to all our panelists. I actually started my life in editorial jobs. I myself worked as an intern at a medical publishing company one summer when I was in college, and I ended up being an editorial assistant. I also did an internship at a book publisher and ended up as an editorial assistant for Vogue and Mirabella magazines when I was young, much younger. So I was obviously in New York, and it's interesting to hear what has changed and what hasn't changed about finding those kinds of jobs. And I do appreciate so much what the panelists have told us about the local situation in particular, because when I came out here and students were asking me about jobs, I didn't know about the local publishing landscape. And I think that, I was one of those New Yorker focused people and was sort of, shall we say, looked down a little bit on the local industry when I first arrived, largely because Los Angeles Magazine wouldn't give me a job. But anyway, I want to thank you all for spending time with us, for taking the time and talking to our students, and for providing so much information for them. Thank you again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In case you didn't hear me say thank you the first time or the first 18 times. Kathy is giving you a namaste from the corner there. Do you want to say anything, Kathy, before we go?
No, just to repeat again how grateful I am. I think everyone must have gotten so much fabulous information from the panelists. Thank you to Rochelle for directing and guiding such a wonderful conversation. And I hope that all panelists realize how much good you have done today. It's the ripple effect. It's going to spread wide and far, and we're just so grateful for your time and your expertise. So thank you.
And should you wish to, if you have further questions that you would like us to either answer in later panels or if there are questions that come up that you didn't think of right now, please feel free to email those questions to me, and I can survey our panelists on the responses and get some information back out to everyone who attended today through our wonderful website. So I guess I'll just stop now. I hope everybody has a great weekend. It was nice meeting all of you, and we will see you again, I hope. The attendees, we hope to see you again in March during our next non-publishing career panel. Take good care, everybody.
Thanks very much.
That seemed to go.
Yes, there we are.
Yeah, we're down to 8 attendees.
Yeah.
Yeah,
was
there's
great.
nothing going on to the 8 attendees who haven't logged out yet.
Great. That
There's
was
nothing,
Talking
you're
to
not
each
going to
other?
get any special information. We're just
That
going to
was-
do a little wrap up amongst ourselves. So
that
go
was-
away. We love
that
you,
was
but go
fabulous.
away.
No, that was great. I think, I mean, and we didn't lose anybody. We started out with 46 and kept up 44 throughout.
Mhm.
And the classes I've attended, et cetera, that's never the case. So there's usually a trickle off.
Yep, no, it was a very steady group of people. That was really exciting. Well done, team.
Yes,
Hey.
good job. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and
So-
even more, I was doing the math, and if we did get it more than 50%, so half of 73 would have been 36, and we ended up with 44. So
Well,
pretty good.
44 includes the panel, all of us who are
Oh.
panelists. So
Yeah.
we did get exactly, we got 36, we had
Oh.
30